welcome back everybody to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon, and this is going to be an action-packed episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. We're going to talk about the transfer portal, who's coming into Georgia, who's leaving, what we think of what Georgia's added so far, as well as maybe some pieces they still need. We're going to talk about some draft decisions. One big one as far as a guy that's deciding to come back to Georgia for the 2026 season. Some significant losses and one we're still waiting to find out about. A couple of players who decided to announce that they're not going to enter the portal or staying at Georgia. Those are some big announcements there. And then we're going to talk about the NFL playoffs. Some Bulldogs making some big noise, and then finish things out with a little bit of Georgia basketball. But fellas, let's start with the transfer portal, and I like doing this whenever we do these podcasts this time of year. We are recording this at 12:04 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, so if someone else is added to the list or someone transfers out, and you're like, why are they not talking about this? Well, it hadn't happened when we were recording this podcast. But I want to talk about some of the guys that Georgia has added at this point. Georgia's added 7 players. I'll shout out the latest one was on Tuesday morning. Former Oklahoma cornerback Gentry Williams commits to Georgia. Go through the full list. Kentucky running back Dante Dowdell. Georgia Tech receiver Isaiah Canyon. Auburn outside linebacker Amaris Williams. USC cornerback Braylon Conley. Clemson safety Khalil Barnes. And East Carolina safety Jamarly Riddle. I'll kind of give an overview on how I see these guys, and feel free, guys, if you think you would edit anything I'm saying. Looking at the list, I think Isaiah Canyon is a guy they're bringing in from Georgia Tech. That looks like a very good chance to be the starting X receiver this year. He's going to compete with C.J. Wiley, some of the other guys on the list. Amaris Williams from Auburn. Very interested. I see him kind of being part of a 1-2 tandem at outside linebacker. I figure Quintavious Johnson is still going to be your starting outside linebacker, but you'll see a lot of Amaris. A guy that was a 5-star, a guy that I think has a ton of potential, and is a guy that flashed during his time at Auburn. Dante Dowdell, I sort of see him as the Josh McCray of the 2026 team. A short yardage back, that third down back, that guy you can lean on, a bigger body, and a guy that can factor in there. The 2 safeties, those are 2 guys that I think are going to be very interesting when you talk about the different defensive back battles. Jamarly Riddle, Khalil Barnes, could be a starting safety, could be a starting star, depending on what they want to do with Rayshawn Dinkins. And so getting those guys, especially Khalil Barnes, a guy with a lot of experience, there's a lot to like about that addition. And then the corners, Braylon Conley, Gentry Williams, I think those guys are going to compete to be part of a rotation at corner. I really like the addition of Gentry Williams from the standpoint of you take a flyer on a guy that's had some issues staying healthy, but he's an experienced corner, a guy that if he is healthy, maybe he plays a big role for you. So that's sort of my overview. Do you guys feel like that's kind of a fair assessment of what Georgia's at? I'll start with you, Ben. Do you think that's a pretty fair read of things?
No, I mean, I do. I mean, of course, we knew that defensive back was going to be a priority coming into this window. I think, you look at the Braylon Conley and Gentry Williams edition most recently, I think that they're probably depth corners that could maybe play in different spots in the defensive backfield. I think the key thing there is both of those guys had pre-existing relationships with Dante Williams, and that is ultimately why I think those 2 guys signed with Georgia. We knew that they were going to have to go heavy on safety, just like they did last cycle, and there were some elite options names that had been referenced that were out there, but Jamarly Riddle was absolutely right in the middle of that. I think that he's a guy that Georgia is expecting to come in and have an instant impact. Not to say that any of those other 3 guys in the secondary aren't. Obviously, Khalil Barnes seemed like he was linked to Georgia from the moment that he announced he was going to be entering the portal. Those other 2 guys that I think will be really important depth pieces in the secondary. But Jamarly Riddle to me, I'm going to have some tongue twisters trying to say his name apparently. He's the one that if you're expecting someone to come in and have an immediate day one impact, and when we're getting into spring practices and we're talking about who is very much part of this starting rotation, he's the one that I'm saying Georgia needs to hit on there for this to be considered a successful transfer portal window at defensive back. You mentioned Isaiah Canyon. I think that we've seen Georgia bring in Colby Young and Noah Thomas, and we know that out of the high school ranks, they brought in CJ Wiley and maybe to a lesser extent, but still a bigger body, longer type Ryan Mosley. Like Georgia wants to have a few of those guys on its roster at any given time. Isaiah Canyon's been there and done that against Georgia at times. That always helps your case when Georgia goes back and watches your film at the college level and says, oh, you kind of busted our ass a little bit. We should probably, take a deeper look there. Isaiah Canyon had a couple of those moments. I think you were spot on. I described Dante Dowdell and it blew someone's mind. I was like, to me, this is like a Josh McCray, Cash Jones hybrid option, which someone said, that sounds crazy. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's like some kind of fusion food that I've never even heard of before. What I meant by that is last year, though, you wanted to get short yardage, big body snaps. You were going to give that to Josh McCray. If you wanted somebody that you were going to be able to trust and pass pro on third down that you could also use as a receiver, you were going to use Cash Jones. I think that Dante Dowdell does a few of those things nicely that will complement Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens, which I'm sure we'll talk about during this show as well, just in terms of them bringing those two guys back as the feature options. I don't think that Georgia's going to be done necessarily yet on the offensive side, because I think that offensive tackle is still a priority in my mind, but that is also like the right guy has to be there at the right value, at the right price. Like it's not you have to go get an offensive tackle and go get a guy that might be worse than Michael Uni or Jamal Merriweather for more expensive just for the sake of going and getting a tackle. They're not going to do that. Did I mention Amaris Williams? You did mention Amaris Williams. I think that's it's funny. We talk about how the watering down of Georgia's star rating sometimes on the defensive side of the ball, and it feels like it's not as strong. You look at that group now. I mean, they've got Amaris Williams that was a 5-star some places. You've got Elijah Griffin that was a 5-star everywhere. You've got Jordan Hall, if he's back and healthy, that he was a 5-star in certain places. You've got Raylan Wilson, Chris Cole, Justin Williams. Like, there's 5-stars all over this defensive front now, and Amaris Williams just adds himself to that. I agree with you, Jordan. Like, I still lean towards Quintavious Johnson being the guy at outside backer, but I also think that Amaris Williams is different enough. He's going to play standing up. He's going to play with his hand on the ground. It's going to be a la Gabe Harris, which I think is now going to allow you to do some different things with Gabe Harris as well, which I think will be important. But all that to say, like, I think that Georgia upgraded in the transfer portal this window while also doing an unbelievable job of high school roster retention. Better, no matter what anybody says, better than anybody in the sport at retaining your roster, especially the elite of your roster.
Ben did a good job of breaking down some of those guys. The two that I'm most interested in are two guys that he highlighted. Jamarly Riddle, a guy that, looking at him, he was a first team all AAC at East Carolina and did a fantastic job. And from the read of it, from what I could tell, I think Georgia kind of wanted to keep it quiet how badly they wanted him. And hey, shout out Camden County. You add him with Elias Williams. I think, as Ben said, he's got an opportunity to start there with KJ Bolden in 2026. So really like that pickup. And then the one he just talked about, Amaris Williams. I mean, this was a dude, from my friends on the Auburn beat, and you kind of pay attention to the teams that are Georgia's rivals and teams that Georgia's going to play. I remember when they got him, I want to say, did he flip from Florida? Or I think it might have been Florida back in the day. But I remember it being a huge deal that they got him, and he flashed. And his stats weren't fantastic, but I think that there's a lot to like there when you consider you add him. And I kind of wrote about this when I did my breakdown. You don't add him and, Amaris Williams alone fixes your pass rush. But you add him with Quintavious Johnson, Gabe Harris, maybe you get guys like Chase Linton, Isaiah Gibson more run. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think those are two defenders to be excited about. Kipp, is there anyone from this group that you're particularly interested in? Guys that you think have, a really big upside or that you just want to see in action once they get it, Georgia?
Yeah, I think you look at this group overall, and for me, it's about raising the floor and freeing guys up. And I'll start with Amaris Williams. I just think that for me, the key there is freeing up Gabe Harris. You mentioned Amaris as being a guy that could do a little bit of everything as far as defensive end, outside linebacker, and how that's kind of similar to Gabe. I think Amaris Williams plays defensive end more often than not. He's pushing 270 pounds. And it makes more sense to have Gabe Harris out there to outside linebacker. I just think that's where he was kind of coming into his own and his ability to set the edge, but also improving as a pass rusher. I just think having Gabe Harris and Quintavious Johnson at edge often at the same time. I know that the same linebacker position's kind of been phased out at Georgia, but just having that versatility, I think, raises the floor of Georgia's edge rusher group. And I think that's going to be crucial for Georgia. Still trying to get better in that situation. You saw, I mean, obviously in the last game, that impact in the quarterback was just not an area for strength for Georgia, one that bit them in the end in that game. And then the secondary, like I said, raising the floor. They really liked Kyron Jones last year. He got banged up. I think the transfer portal additions last cycle, the overall just didn't work out. They didn't get the level of play they needed to, and that forced them to ask KJ Bolden to do a lot, and you didn't really get to see him kind of roaming free out there. So you bring in a guy like Jamali Riddle, who the coaching staff so high on, they think he's got Sunday potential there. That's not something you really saw from Georgia last season. You didn't see guys like, oh yeah, that guy's definitely gonna, be an NFL draft pick at safety, other than KJ Bolden. And that's just not something you're used to seeing from Georgia. You bring in Riddle, but also, the fact that you bring in Khalil Barnes and Ginger Williams, the versatility there. Like Ginger Williams came in having played plenty of safety in high school, can absolutely play, nickel if you need him to. Khalil Barnes sounds like a perfect fit for the star position. But that's not to say that Riddle couldn't play there either. I think the point of this is that versatility is going to allow them to just set KJ Bolden free and let him just go out there and ball hawk. And that's really what Georgia needed, and they haven't had in the secondary. And then going back to Williams, I love this addition because Ellis Robinson, you feel pretty good about him. He started 11 games this season, really came into his own the second half of the season. DeMello Jones had some tough games there towards the end, but when you're, the cornerback 2 or 3 at Georgia, that's kind of a rite of passage. So I just think that, the growing pains are there. But Ginger, he started 10 games his second season in Oklahoma at cornerback. So you're raising the floor at that position. So no matter what, like whoever's starting opposite of Ellis, whether it's DeMello, whether it's Gentry, you have a guy who's played a lot of snaps. And then the fact that you can go into the dime package and just have an outstanding group of experienced high-level DBs, I think that's just exactly what Kirby Smart wants. So I think those defensive additions has really made a lot of sense. And now, I mean, as we look at it, like Ben and I have been trying to keep track of the counter. They may have, if nobody else leaves, may have one spot left. So I like what they've done at wide receiver. We're still waiting to see what happens with some guys at offensive tackle, but now you kind of know, like you've hit on some of your biggest needs. It seems like, now you're just watching the portal. I don't think there's anyone in the portal right now that stands out as far as the slot receiver, but you're just waiting to see if someone goes in that makes sense. And then you're obviously waiting to, to see what happens with Ernest Green at offensive tackle. But you have to feel pretty good about answering most of your questions in the offseason.
We'll talk about some of those remaining needs here in a minute. I did want to mention, throw in a high school guy that they added in addition to these transfer portal additions. Dallas Dickerson from North Oconee, wide receiver, a guy with a lot of speed. 4.42 40-yard dash in high school, 10.36 100-meter dash. Ben, what can you tell us about Dallas Dickerson? They add another, man, this has been the offseason for the North Oconee Titans, adding another guy coming home and playing for Georgia. What can you tell us about Dickerson and what Georgia's getting here?
Yeah, I mean, that's the 4th North Oconee high school football player that's going to be on Georgia's roster. I was just, as we were going through that, and I knew we were going to be talking about Dickerson, I don't have the exact numbers, but I am pulling up all the schools that I believe will have multiple high schools that will have multiple players on Georgia's roster next year. IMG Academy, North Oconee High School, Warner Robins is now going to have 3 with Isaiah Canyon on the roster. Buford, of course, Camden now with Jamali Riddle and Elias Williams. Clark Central has 2. Norcross is going to have the Luckies as well. There might be others, but I was just kind of going through that exercise because North Oconee being right in your backyard, having 4 guys that are good enough to play football at Georgia, one, speaks volumes about the North Oconee football program, which I don't think is a news flash to anybody that pays attention to high school football around the area. Like Tyler Orant does an unbelievable job, but to have Khalil Barnes, Kamari Brooks, Landon Roldan, and now Dallas Dickerson, I mean, there is a legitimate backyard pipeline forming right next to where Georgia is. And so that's huge. I mean, Dallas Dickerson, like you mentioned, the first thing you got to bring up is speed with Dallas Dickerson. The dude had not run track in his career. He was very fast. It was very obvious to everyone that they had Landon Roldan and Dallas Dickerson that could just absolutely fly on the perimeter the last 2 years, but neither of them were really running track. Dallas posted like a 10-4 in his first track meet and then goes 10-3-6 in his second track meet. I mean, that is like serious speed. And look, Georgia was originally going to sign Brady Marchese out of high school. Things got weird there in the middle of the early signing period and put Georgia in a really bad spot. I think that Dallas Dickerson and Georgia both got very lucky that this played out this way, that he was able to break free of his national letter of intent, which I think was helped by the fact that Kentucky had a coaching change and they were probably going in a different direction with how they wanted to do some things at wide receiver with what Will Stein's preferences were. And so I think he was able to break free from that national letter of intent at the exact point in time that the school that he probably always wanted to go to needed a fast high school wide receiver. And they went from Brady Marchese, and this is not to be a knock on Brady Marchese because I think they're different types of players, but Brady was like a 10-7, 10-8 guy, which is very fast. No, do not misconstrue what I'm saying there. But they were able to ultimately replace that with a high school wide receiver that runs a sub 10-4. So they upgraded in the speed department in what they were able to do at that high school wide receiver spot. Now, is he as polished of a blocker as Brady? Probably not. And that you know that when you're taking him, that you're getting a slightly different prospect than you were originally going to be taking. But I think this is a great fit for both sides. This dude can absolutely move. I cannot believe that Landon Roldan and Dallas Dickerson were playing on the same high school team 2 years ago. I mean, I remember going to watch Landon and Kamari and then Christian Gass, who was at the East Side when they went and played, which was an all-time football game. Jaden Barr has like 5 touchdowns in that game, ends up going to Georgia Tech. All-time football game that I went to. But I was there to see all these big-time prospects, not knowing who Dallas Dickerson was. And Dallas Dickerson took over multiple portions of that football game. Like, he has a game-breaking speed about him where you give him any type of space whatsoever, he can take it the distance. Again, I always pump the brakes with freshman wide receivers at Georgia because even the Talon Taylors and the CJ Wileys of the world take a little bit time to break through, but it does feel the way that Georgia has structured its roster for the 2026 season that there are going to be more opportunities for these high school guys to have an impact than maybe you would have said over the last couple of years when you had London Humphreys and London's still there, obviously, but Colby Young, Noah Thomas, Ra Thomas during some of those periods of time. Like, I think that there is going to be a heavier high school emphasis from the production standpoint at wide receiver for the 2026 season and presumably for the 2027 season as well.
Well, let's talk about that. We have Peyton Calhoun on Facebook, very, very worried about the wide receivers, which I understand the concern, absolutely. Among the guys coming back, when you look to the 2025 season, Isaiah Canyon had the most receiving yards, and he wound up with 480 for Georgia Tech this past season. You've got London Humphreys coming back, and then besides that, I mean, you've got a lot of inexperience. Ben, how much concern should there be from Georgia fans about the state of wide receiver? Do you think it's a little overblown, or where do you think how do you think the fans should feel about what they've got in that room at this point, because the portal is still open?
I understand anybody that has concerns, the Peyton Calhouns of the world. I get where you're coming from. You haven't seen a whole lot of these guys produce, and ultimately that's all that people are going to care about is who have you seen production from. I have seen a lot of Talon Taylor up close. I have seen a lot of CJ Wiley up close. I've seen a lot of Tyler Williams up close. I've seen a lot of Thomas Blackshear up close. Craig Dandridge is someone that I absolutely think is going to be able to play year one. Ryan Mosley is someone that I think he gets his conditioning right. I don't think people are talking about him enough as someone that could have a year one impact as well. am I sitting here saying that every single one of those guys is going to have massive seasons? No, we know that Georgia likes to spread the rock around. We know that statistically speaking, you're probably not going to have any of those guys just blow you away with a 1,000-yard season, right? Like, that's not the world that you should expect to be living in the Georgia world when we're talking receivers. But I do believe in every single one of those guys that I just mentioned. And I do think that Georgia believes in every single one of those guys that I just mentioned. Otherwise, they would have probably done some processing via the portal. They probably would have gone and tried to get a more high impact guy. Not saying that Isaiah Canyon's not, just that he at 6'4", like, he fits a very specific prototype that Georgia has been looking for in the portal year after year after year recently. And so, like, yeah, I do think that Georgia is going to have a bunch of weapons at receiver. And that doesn't even begin to mention Elias Williams is going to take the next step. Jaden Riddell hasn't, he's still around. Like, he's going to end up taking the next step. Lawson Lucky, we know, is going to be thrust more into probably a receiver type of role with Delp gone and Elias and Ethan Barbour stepping up more as those inline type of guys. Like, I didn't even mention Ethan Barbour until just then. Like, there are so many weapons to me on the perimeter that Georgia's going to find a way to use these guys the right way. I mean, I haven't even mentioned Sokovie White-Helton, who Georgia hasn't taken a slot yet really in the portal. So I would think that Sokovie White-Helton is going to be someone that gets a lot of run, someone that I believe in very much, has a big 20-yard first down catch in the Sugar Bowl already. So it's not to say that you haven't seen any production from any of those guys. And, that just talking to high school guys, that hasn't touched on London Humphreys, who we've seen do it multiple years in a row in big time spots. So yeah, I'm not worried about the receiver position. And I think that if Georgia was whatsoever, they would have approached this window much differently than they did at that position.
You hit on a lot of what I would have said, Ben. I mean, I think, one, you've got that young talent at wide receiver. I'm a big believer that eventually you got to rely on those guys, because if you just decide we're going portal every single year, if I'm recruiting against Georgia and they want to try to bring in some high school talent at receiver, I'm going, why are you going to Georgia? You're never going to play there. They're just going to recruit over you. And I think they have enough talent. It's time to let these young guys loose and let them play roles. And then the other thing I was going to say, get the tight ends more involved. The past 2 years, I do not think they've done a good enough job of getting very talented tight ends involved in consistent factors in the passing game. Now, some of that's on Gunnar Stockton. He's got to be willing to throw across the middle. He's got to be willing to feed those guys, and they've got the talent there. I am interested, like Ben said, maybe we see Lawson Lucky line up wide a few times, because they've got enough talent. They need to get as many of those guys on the field as they can. Kipp, how do you feel about where they are at wide receiver? Are you concerned, or do you feel like they're in a pretty good spot at this point?
I don't think there's a way for us to know whether concern is warranted until we see these young guys play. At this point, it's the coaching staff and speculation. So we can only lean on, we know the coaching staff loves the guys they have. We can tell everyone that's listening and all the Georgia fans, the coaching staff loves this receiver group. But you're still going to speculate because the production's not there. The numbers aren't there to help all the Georgia fans sleep at night. And that's just going to be the way it is until the season starts, unless, Georgia actually has its spring game on TV this year. And, which we'll see how that goes. But at this point, it is up to the coaching staff to look in that room and make that decision and know that, yeah, they're going to be graded on whether or not they add another guy and this group pans out. Do I see this group as having a ton of potential? Of course. Like, just looking at the fact that, Craig Dandridge is at the bottom of the, my scholarship distribution page, I'm thinking this guy's going to make a huge impact in year one, in my opinion. Sokovie White is the guy that we've just been saying, man, like, how were they not able to get him on the field more? And here he's got a starting slot position waiting for him. He's got the opportunity there. He's a guy that was outstanding, and all the, his teammates talked about how, like, this guy just makes plays in practice. And now he's got the chance to do it in games. So for fans, it's like they want to have it both ways, and we understand it. But if you recruit guys to this school and now they have the opportunity and you're mad they didn't go to the portal to get someone to play on over top of them, like, that's a little bit, you're trying to play both sides here. I think these are the guys that Georgia signed. You want these guys to step into those roles, because high school recruiting is still how Kirby Smart chooses to build his roster. So trust in that coaching staff that these guys are going to step in and make big plays. And if they don't, then you know that you can hold the coaching staff accountable for looking at this group and being wrong. But in January, looking at the group of 11 wide receivers and looking at the fact that somehow we talked about all the tight ends and Caden Prothro's coming in too. Like that guy might be lining up a wide receiver in year one as well. There's no shortage of pass catchers for Georgia to work with. And I think that taking that next step, getting those reps in with Gunnar Stockton and him taking that next step is a lot more important than maybe, any of the guys that are currently still available in the transfer portal at wide receiver.
We'll talk in a few minutes about a need they may still have in the portal, but we're kind of going to tie that with the draft decisions. But I did want to talk about some of the guys who have left Georgia. Again, as we record this, 12:29 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday. Georgia's had 12 guys go in the portal. Some of the bigger ones, I would say at this point, Janelle Aguero, who has committed to Ole Miss. And just some in the most recent days, guys who have committed elsewhere. Andre Evans, the cornerback, is going to NC State. Bo Hughley, offensive tackle, he's going to Colorado. And then one of the latest ones to enter the portal, Elo Mendoza, and he went in with a do not contact tag, which is very interesting. I'll start with you, Kipp. Just really in all the guys who have left, is there any that concern you? Any that Georgia should be worried about losing as they get ready for 2026?
I think that, we expected about 10 or 12 guys, and most of them are going to be based on not knowing whether they had guaranteed playing time. And that is why guys go in the portal most of the time, because you look at it and go, well, I've got some competition there. Do I want to go where I could see myself being a known starter and also, more valuable to another program because they need help there? Or do I want to go into the spring and compete? And, that's kind of where a lot of these guys are. And injuries took, a lot of these guys playing times out of their hands. And in that situation, when you get banged up, like at Georgia, it's just too competitive. You fall behind the eight ball. So I don't really think any of these are a surprise from a depth perspective. You would have liked to have had a guy like Bo Hughley there. But that even with Georgia replacing both starting offensive tackles, Bo wasn't guaranteed a starting position at left tackle or right tackle right now. We wouldn't project him to be the starter at either position. So it still makes sense for him to enter the portal. So I don't think any of these are a huge shock or guys that, maybe caught Georgia by surprise either. And they typically know these things. Even before, Georgia played Ole Miss, I think Georgia had a pretty good idea who was planning on entering the portal. And I think you could see by the guys they took, they already had a plan in place. And I think overall, things have gone, pretty smoothly for Georgia.
Ben, any thoughts on the guys who have left Georgia? Any concerns there?
I wouldn't say any concerns. Kipp nailed it in the sense that Georgia had a pretty good idea who was going to be hitting the portal. The guys that we have, for anyone that's been subscribed to Dogs 24/7, that we've maybe alluded to where there's some ongoing conversations, those are the handful of guys that it's more complex than that just in this current environment. And you don't really get that sorted out until the last 24, 48 hours or so as we have a little bit of time left. So, but everyone else, I don't think Georgia was, for lack of a better way of describing it, was feeling this wild need to try to retain them. There were other guys that they had priorities on. Bo Hughley's the one that I think is interesting, given that it's still we still don't have an answer on Ernest Green yet. We still don't know exactly what Georgia's offensive tackle situation is going to look like next year. But even then, knowing that Bo Hughley transferred and ends up at Colorado, he probably wasn't going to be the front runner for that either of those starting tackle spots. And I think that drove his decision. That drove Georgia's acceptance and willingness to say, hey, maybe that does make more sense for you. It becomes interesting if Ernest does go pro, or if Georgia's not able to find some other tackle in the portal that makes sense, then your depth just gets a little bit dicey. Even this year, when Monroe goes down and you're going to Auburn, I know it didn't work out great over those first couple of series when Bo was in, but he was the next up guy that Georgia was expecting to step up in there. So if you don't have answers beyond, Ernest Green or a potential portal guy, it gets scary, I would say. Injury concerns start to make you fret a little bit, but I will say this. I'm not going to tie any names to it specifically. Everyone knows Jordan Seaton is going to end up being a big competitive offensive tackle recruitment in the portal. Georgia will get involved there, but how likely that is given how I think that one's going, I have questions about that. I have been told that there are other names in the tackle portal market right now that Georgia has been in communication with, has kept its eye on, but hasn't necessarily pushed or moved forward yet because they still want to evaluate what might hit the portal over these next 24, 48 hours or so, and then that will dictate. But I do still tend to think Georgia will sign an offensive tackle. It's just not quite clear yet who that might be in the portal.
Just to point it out, midnight on Friday is when the portal closes. Now, for Indiana and Miami, their players get a little bit more of a runway because they're still playing. So there's a lot that can still happen and a lot to pay attention to, which that's why you should subscribe to Dawgs 24/7. We've had a ton of threads. Ben's done a great job, especially last week when he was in San Antonio. Still pass along intel, guys we need to keep an eye out for. We hope you guys will join us on the Junkyard because there has been a lot going on, and that will continue this week and going into the next few weeks because the guys have to enter the portal by midnight on Friday, but they do not have to announce when or where they are transferring to, so that will be ongoing there. We'll take a quick break, come back and talk about the draft decisions for some dogs, the big one we're still waiting on, talk about Nate Frazier, Chauncey Bowens coming back, talk about the dogs in the NFL, several of them moving on to the next round of the NFL playoffs, and then we'll finish things out with a little Georgia basketball. All right, guys, I believe the last time we recorded a podcast, we knew 3 guys had decided what they were going to do as far as going to the NFL draft. You had Christian Miller, Zachariah Branch, C.J. Allen, all getting ready and moving on to the next level. Decisions that we've learned since then, Raylan Wilson coming back, Xavier McLeod coming back, Gabe Harris coming back, Peyton Woodring coming back. The big departure since the last time we recorded, Monroe Freeling is going pro. He's got an opportunity to maybe be a first-round pick. I've seen a lot of people since he officially announced saying, they love his upside. They see him as a potential first-round pick. I'll start with you, Kipp. What do you make of the loss? Let's talk specifically losing Monroe. We've highlighted it a bunch with what that means at offensive tackle, but how big of a loss this is for Georgia, and also what you see as Monroe's potential going into the draft.
I mean, first off, just credit to him for his toughness last season. I mean, just that Auburn game, you didn't think he was going to be able to play. And he, one drive, he comes right back in. He played through, several different injuries this past season, was able to make 12 starts, and I think provided stability for a Georgia offensive line that was breaking in a lot of new players. I mean, you had freshmen out there. You had a new starter at center. Monroe Freeling was kind of that, just like that stabilizing force. And he, down the stretch, I was kind of leaning towards he's probably, could come back and improve his stock. And then he just started putting out outstanding NFL film against really, really talented defensive linemen. And I was like, yeah, he's probably going to go regardless. And I think for Georgia, it's just a position to where, you're trying to get someone in who could stay healthy and just give you like consistent snaps at left tackle. He provided that for, basically a season and a half at Georgia. And I think that is when Georgia's at its best, when it has like an elite left tackle in there. Its offense can really, kind of shine. And he really provided that for Georgia. And I think, his floor is probably in the 50s. I said that on the Junkyard. I thought like 54, 55 might be where I have him right now, like middle, late second round. But we know that, like, once the combine comes around and pro day and interviews, like, I don't only think there's one direction his stock is going to go unless there's a big medical red flag, and that's probably late first round. So he can end up going in the 28 to 32 range when all is said and done. And overall, regardless, like second round, first round money, you take that whenever you can get it. So it made sense for him to leave, even in the NIL era. I mean, it's like, sure, you can go into the portal and try to make, first round NFL draft money. But for Monroe, it wasn't really about that. It's like, if your dream's to play in NFL and they're telling you can be an early draft pick, I don't think we're talking about $500,000, give or take, or whatever, or $1 million. I think it's about he wants to fulfill that dream and be in the NFL, and it made sense for him.
Yeah, I think my read on it, I think that he wanted to be at Georgia. I think he's someone who enjoyed, being a Georgia Bulldog. But at the end of the day, I mean, this was the decision he had to make. And I understand that there was conversation. I'm sure Georgia worked really hard to try to convince him to stay put. But I don't know that this was really much up for debate if you're Monroe Freeling. This is what I think is the best for him. Like Kipp said, there's a chance he's a first-round pick, and that's just something you do not pass up. No matter how much you love the school you're at and the coaches and being part of that team. So it made a lot of sense to me for Monroe to do this. It makes things really interesting for Georgia, but you got to do what's best for you, and I think Monroe did that. Ben, what's your read just on the Monroe Freeling piece of this, him going pro and what that opportunity can mean for him?
No surprises, I wouldn't say. I mean, for the last few weeks, I think Georgia's felt that that's the way that it was going. And as much as folks might have been wish casting, saying like, hey, getting Monroe back for next year would be huge, which it would have been. Anytime you're an offensive tackle and people are suggesting you could go in the first round, it's going to be really, really hard for you not to go. I thought there was a chance Georgia losing the Sugar Bowl could have increased the chances of him coming back, whether that have been for his own personal motivations or the fact that he basically lost out 2 games of game film, where if he had gone on and had great performances, it would have been a no-brainer. I think it was a no-brainer anyway. So nobody on the Georgia side of things is surprised by this whatsoever. It does, as we just talked about with the Ernest Green situation, the Bo Healy situation, and trying to figure out a portal tackle situation, like that is the position group where I look at the 2026 season and say Georgia has to figure tackle out for it to be as successful of a year as they want it to be. I'm inclined to believe that they will. It's just there's a little unknown right now as we're sitting here at noon on Tuesday. It's not quite clear what Georgia's plan at tackle is going to be next season.
Well, let's dive right into it, Ben. The one we're waiting on right now is right tackle Ernest Green. I believe the deadline is January 14th for everyone to announce if they are going to declare or not. This is a situation where if he comes back to Georgia, he will be a redshirt senior. So he's already been at Georgia for 4 years. I'll start with you, Ben. What's your read on this situation? And let's say that he decides to go pro. How catastrophic does this leave the offensive tackle room for Georgia?
Well, it's I feel like this is the 3rd year in a row we're having this conversation about Ernest, where it's like, is this going to be the year that he goes? Like, he's just had so many opportunities and it's just never quite, really from a health standpoint, materialized the way that he would have liked to. And I think that's why we're sitting here and there's still a little question. When I was having conversations around the Sugar Bowl about Monroe, the feeling then was that Georgia was not anticipating either of them to be coming back. I think that I do genuinely believe at this point in time, it is still undecided. And like you said, he doesn't have much time to make that decision if he's planning on going pro. And so we should find out here relatively soon. I think because Georgia lost Monroe and they were willing to be very aggressive financially to try and retain Monroe, that it has changed the way that they're probably able to sell Ernest on coming back. And I think that I'm not saying Georgia's desperate because they think that Ernest is a really good player and they want to get Ernest back, but I think that they now view Ernest as a much more important, like must sign, must return type of guy than they would have before Monroe had officially made his decision, or before Carius Kern had signed with Ole Miss from transferring from LSU. Like there have been some things that have happened that I think make Ernest Green much more of a need now than he probably was a week and a half ago. Like I still think, even if Ernest comes back, which I really do think is a 50-50 proposition as we're sitting here right now, but I probably lean towards him coming back because of some of that desperation that I was just talking about with Georgia a little bit. I still think they might need to consider going and getting another tackle. Like you're thin at that position. And I mean, there are guys that, again, sort of like the receiver conversation that we just had. I believe that Juan Gaston has a future at tackle at Georgia. There were times last spring when I was having conversations with people that were saying Ernest might be looking over his shoulder at Juan Gaston a little bit based on some of the things that he's been doing early in spring practices as well. So I do believe that Juan Gaston has a home out there in the future. I do think that there's still opportunity for Michael Uni to develop and take some next steps at offensive tackle as well. A guy that's still there that I'm a little bit surprised by, but it makes sense. And we've just kind of waited to see if he ever breaks through the rotation, whether that be at tackle or guard. Jamal Merriweather. Like there are people that are on this roster where it's like, if they're starting and playing for Georgia and having success, I don't think anyone should be surprised by that. And maybe Georgia feels more convicted in that than some of us who haven't seen them do. And they're not feeling as desperate at offensive tackle. But I think right now, priority number one over the next 24 hours is finding a way to convince Ernest Green to come back for his redshirt senior season and still be looking for a potential other portal option at tackle. It won't be easy because you're not probably guaranteeing someone a starting spot unless it's a Jordan Seaton type. But I have some depth concerns there at tackle. And I think Ernest Green coming back is pretty much mission critical at this point.
To your point, that doesn't solve everything if Ernest Green does come back. We are talking about a guy that for the better part of his Georgia career has struggled with injuries. So you do need to have bodies behind him. You have to have guys that you feel good about. I'm with you, Ben. I think ultimately if I had to give a prediction, I think he comes back. I don't think it's this simple, but I put it on the board when Monroe announced and said, if I'm Georgia, I basically take what I was going to give Monroe and say, look, Ernest, we're adding this to your compensation, and it's not going to be that simple, but he's huge. I mean, he's a guy that, you talk about what you want to do in 2026. You got to have guys that are capable that you can rely on to protect Gunnar Stockton. So I'm not sitting here and saying he's for sure coming back. That's my prediction, but I think it's very much up in the air, and I don't really blame Ernest for taking his time. There's folks, I've seen on the message board, I understand this side of it too, that's like, hey, what are we waiting on? Let's make a decision. This is a big decision for Ernest. I mean, this is, something that I know he's worked for, his entire life. His father played in the NFL. I know there's part of him that wants to get out there and have his dad be able to see him be an NFL player and take that opportunity. So I don't blame him at all for taking his time. It does complicate things, but that's the nature of the calendar and what it is. And Georgia's going to have to wait, and we're waiting right along with them to see what happens. Kipp, what do you make of this situation with Ernest Green and just what Georgia's got to do, whether or not he winds up coming back for 2026?
Why wouldn't Ernest Green wait? What has he accomplished by waiting this entire time? The price of the brick's gone up. Like that's what's happened. If you're not a no-brainer first or second, a day one or day two pick, college football is where you can make the most money right now, easily. I mean, I'm thinking about Ernest Green's draft status right now and thinking he's probably like a sixth round pick. He's a day three pick. And the only thing you're guaranteed then is your signing bonus. So that's what, let's just say he goes in the sixth round. That's like $230,000. Okay. And we're seeing now, I mean, you can throw any kind of number out there, but the going rate for a starting offensive tackle in the transfer portal, let's just say it's well over double that, right? So why wouldn't Ernest Green wait until Georgia knows? Like for one thing, when you have another offensive tackle thinking about it, Monroe Freeling, there is no reason for you to make that decision before he does. And that's what his agent's telling him. So I get that fans are angry, like Georgia needs to know. Georgia's talking to him. They're talking to his agent every day. They know where things stand with him. He's not keeping them in the dark as far as what he's thinking. But, I mean, this is personal strategy at this point. And that's just the way college football is right now. Monroe's made his decision. and now the negotiations can begin. I think that's where things are right now. So I would lean towards Ernest Green does come back because, like I said, I do think that I don't know where Georgia sees him as far as they still have to look at their numbers and go, well, I mean, we still have some guys on our roster we have to re-sign who haven't re-signed who could still enter the portal. So they have to look at all of that stuff. But I would say that he is one where now it just makes sense for Georgia. We're in better shape if we bring him back because, him and Juan Gaston as our offensive tackles, we would feel a lot better going into the spring, knowing those are kind of the guys we have, and maybe we can add another one after we get him in. And then for fans, I mean, there was a time when people were like, he needs to be replaced. And now it's like, gosh, I hope Ernest Green comes back because if you remember that second season when he played left tackle, he was really good. He played a lot of really good football for Georgia. And that is the potential you have if you bring Ernest Green back. If he's healthy, you can have him come in and give you that quality play again. That is obviously Georgia's number one priority right now. I think they get it done. And like you guys said, I think as soon as you get that done, or even before, try to find another tackle and for what could be the last position, your last spot on the roster. If you've got one and nobody else leaves, get another offensive tackle in there. Because I just mentioned you want to go in with Ernest Green and Juan Gaston at your starting offensive tackles. The next guy up after that might have a lot of potential, might even be a true freshman in Ikino Boku. Maybe he's the next freshman offensive tackle that comes in and gives you Andrew Thomas play. But regardless of that, you want to make sure you have some guys with experience coming into Athens this spring.
Ernest Green, answer the call and let us know what's going to happen there. All right, let's talk about two guys who have re-signed for Georgia, and that's Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens. Part of a very productive Monday for the Georgia backfield because they get Dante Dowdell, and then Chauncey Bowens announces he's coming back, and then the big one, Nate Frazier. There have been rumors, potentially going in the portal. He puts all those rumors to bed and announces he's coming back to Georgia for 2026. So I'll start with you, Ben. What do you think about, let's pair these two together. Your top two rushers from 2025 are coming back. How big is this for Georgia, bringing back Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens?
Very big. There were worlds over the last few weeks where I think things were very uncertain about the Nate Frazier situation. He was the one of the names behind the scenes, I would say, that we had brought up. Like, I think, Jordan, we had talked about it even before the Sugar Bowl. You were like, who's the guy that would shock some people that you think things could get weird with? And that was the name that I brought up. Just calling it like it is. Like, certain guys are represented by the biggest sports agencies in the sport. NFL guys, like, the way it works is there are some of these agencies that have been dominating the NFL for years, and they have seen an opportunity here to go and evaluate high school players, college players, get them on their client list and treat them the same way that they would treat any of their NFL clients when they're going through free agency periods. And so that's how this was approached for Nate Frazier. Because of the nature of it, I was worried a little bit that things could get weird. That said, I don't think, like, when things kind of got crazy this over the past weekend, I do think that there was I think the panic button was hit far too soon on this one. I think this was, as I said on the Dawgs 24/7 message board, the way it unfolded with Nate Frazier was 100% standard operating procedure in terms of how you should have expected it to play out, the timeline, the window of things happening, his agent having conversations again. And some people don't like it. I tell people, get the hell over it, because it's just the way of the world. It's how it is. His agent was negotiating for his client's best interest, and the best way to do that was to have other suitors out there that they were having communication with, while also having enough, runway in the transfer portal window where they, things weren't getting up to the last hour of the transfer portal window, putting Georgia in some kind of bad spot. I do not believe that Georgia ever felt that this one was going to slip away. I think that Georgia understood there was going to have to be some hardball negotiating that was going to have to go on with this. I think that Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens are both are going to be a very well-paid backfield for Georgia next season. And I think, to answer what the question you actually asked me, Jordan, not any of this mess that I've ended up going on to answer about, they need those two guys next year. Like, Georgia could not afford to be going and doing the portal chasing game. Like, I think, Texas did that. Alabama did that. It got messy with Hollywood Smothers. Like, it's not a position group that you want to be driving up prices in these portal recruiting battles when you have guys that you really, really like on your roster that you want to retain. I think that getting Nate Frazier locked in was really important. I think that getting Chauncey Bowens locked in was really important. And again, despite some of the noise that ended up happening around that, I don't think anything truly weird was ever going to be happening. I think Nate Frazier wanted to be at Georgia and he wanted to re-sign with Georgia. Georgia wanted to re-sign him. His agent wanted to get Nate the best deal that he could get, and Kirby Smart and everybody involved with those decisions at Georgia wanted to make sure that Georgia could get the best deal that they could get. And I think that they came to a pretty solid common ground in that. The thing that I want to bring up about the Nate Frazier situation is, like, he's not alone. These types of things have been happening with a handful of guys and are still happening with a handful of guys. This is for educational purposes for future portal windows. When you hear that guys are unsigned mid portal window, that's not weird. That's not some crazy thing. Like, yes, it's amazing that Georgia signed 60 to 70 guys before the portal window even opened. Like, that is huge for how you can allocate your time during the transfer portal window when it actually opens up. But any prospect that is represented by, and I'm not going to name drop the agencies, but there are a few agencies where anyone who pays attention to it knows these are the ones that rep the best of the best in the NFL world. That's just how these are going to go. You're going to have to wait throughout the course of the transfer portal window for those negotiations to unfold. That's what happened here. Great for Georgia to get them back. Now it's important to be able to do the same with a couple of other guys. And I think that, in some cases it won't get as loud as it got with Nate Frazier, but the exact same things were happening behind the scenes with those players too.
You took the words out of my mouth, Ben, with trying to get it across to people. Like, the negotiations are not a reason to panic. I mean, it's honestly probably better you're hearing about it rather than just, oh, it dropped one day and so-and-so's going in the transfer portal. Like, that's just standard operating procedure at this point. And to talk about the additions or bringing back, I should say, Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens, I really like Chauncey Bowens. I still don't know that you would feel great if he was the leading rusher coming back. He battled injuries toward the end of the season. You would feel kind of shaky with what you've got if he is seen as your lead back, but I think he's got a lot of potential, and I think he's going to play a big role in 2026. Nate Frazier, I think, is a huge, being able to retain him. I thought he was playing his best ball toward the end of his sophomore season. And I talked about this the first podcast we did after the Sugar Bowl. I really think a what if from the end of that game that I took for granted in the moment was, what if Nate doesn't get hurt? I think it might be a very different ending for Georgia, because I thought he was really getting hot, and then he gets hurt and he leaves the game. And people have asked me about that injury. I don't think it's something we have to worry about long term. Had they played the next week, maybe he doesn't play, if Georgia advances to the semifinals against Miami. But I think he's going to be fine. And I think, again, huge to keep both of those guys. You feel good about your run game with those options. With Bo Walker still back there, you add Dante Dowdell. You bring in Jay Lamar as well. I think that they should feel good about this run game and where things are situated going into 26. Kipp, what do you make of all the hoopla that we had around Nate Frazier and to bring back your top rushers, your top two rushers, I should say, going into 2026?
It's just a different world, like Ben said. I get it. Like, there's some panic involved. There's, some stress until you know who you are retaining on the roster. But that's kind of just been what all of us have tried to, reiterate on the Junkyard is roster retention is like the number one thing that Kirby Smart has to deal with. And everyone's like, why isn't Georgia bringing in 25 transfer portal guys? I'm like, did you guys see the team talent composites that go out in August right before the season, and then Georgia's right there at the top? Like, that is expensive. That's just what it is. But they did get it done. And correct. I mean, I might be wrong on this, but Georgia's the only team that now is bringing back 3 of the top 20 rushers in the SEC from last season. And this was a question mark going into the last season. Like, where was Georgia's number 2 running back going to be? And then, you had Nate Frazier fumbling in the Alabama game. And it's like, well, now we don't even know if Nate Frazier is going to be Georgia's number 1 rusher. And so Chauncey Bowens stepped up when they needed him to. And now you actually add a guy in Dante Dowdell that actually ran for more yards, basically the same average as Chauncey Bowens last season, behind maybe one of the worst offenses in the country, Kentucky. So I think basically Georgia's raised its floor in bringing back guys like J. Omar, Bo Walker and Peanut, but then adding J. Omar, they've raised the floor of one of the best run games in the country. And maybe it's 1 or 2 less runs that Gunnar Stockton has to take a hit. Maybe Kirby Smart can sleep a little bit better at night. I doubt it. But at the same time, like, you can look at this room and go, oh yeah, Georgia's in good shape there. This is not going to be a weakness for the Georgia roster. And to be able to say something like that in January, again, knowing we're recording this on Tuesday, all hell might break loose over the next 72 hours. But as it stands right now, like, Georgia looks to have an elite, running back room. And people were, there were a lot of pitchforks, on the Junkyard saying Georgia's running backs are not, they're not what they used to be. And I think that is a different bar that you're trying to compare them to. But I think in college football right now, few colleges wouldn't want to trade running back rooms with Georgia right now, because they have playmakers from top to bottom, in my opinion, and guys that they can, again, rotate in. You talk about guys getting banged up. Now you could just rotate these guys in. We might never know if Nate Frazier can get 25 carries a game, but he might not need to, because they have other quality guys there.
Yeah, I was going to shout out Michael Mangono on Facebook. What a stable of running backs we'll have. They're in good shape, I think, at running back, and they should feel good about what they've got to work with going into 2026. All right, before we get out of here, a couple more things. All right, let me throw it to you, Ben. You got your hand up. Make sure and unmute, and what you got?
So I just had to call this out because this happened while we were on here, and it's not a fully fledged rule set yet, but David Ubben, I believe he's with The Athletic, if I'm not mistaken right now, he sent out a tweet that said FBS head coaches have voted unanimously to expand the eligibility for redshirt years from 4 games to 9 games. This is just a recommendation, and it will be put forth to the Division I committee. I just need to call that out. That feels like a crazy, not necessarily a bad thing. That's just like that's a game changer of a potential rule change. I just wanted to call that out before we got out of here.
And let's talk about it real quick, because I had some folks texting me about that. And the thing that I want to say, and I'd like y'all's opinion on it, I feel like that a lot of coaches have just kind of given up on really like tracking the red shirts, because I think there's been a lot of just like, well, this guy's going to just transfer anyway, so we don't really care. I kind of wonder if that's a piece of it, that it's like, all right, look, we're not really, when it was like 3 or 4 games, it was just like not that big a deal. Maybe if we give a little bit more runway, we can get more guys involved and try to get them, more playing time and really kind of care about what the red shirt and their years of eligibility left. What do you make of it, Ben?
I don't know. It's one of those things. Like, I remember when the transfer portal first launched and the 4-game redshirt rule first launched. Like, I don't think I fully understood exactly the impacts that it was going to have on the sport when that first happened. Like, I remember I was covering Auburn at the time, and I was so focused on the 4-game redshirt rule, and every player that I talked to was like, this transfer portal thing is going to be a game changer. And I was like, yeah, I hadn't really focused on how those two things would be able to work in tandem together either. I mean, I do think it's interesting in that you go from, the rosters that could be 140 or whatever that they were, and now it's down to 105. It does change your depth during the season. Like, you have guys that you can now play that you maybe wouldn't have played because you didn't want to burn some of their years of eligibility. So like true freshmen now, like it does change, I feel like, how much depth you feel like you have among that young group. And maybe not even that young group. Like, there might end up being guys that are older guys that only play 7 or 8 games and they never use their redshirt year early for whatever reason because of, like, I don't know. This could just a lot of different things could play out with this, but I do feel like it changes that. And it also probably changes with like quarterbacks, like getting young quarterbacks more run. I don't know. 4 games, you probably weren't playing that much anyway as a young quarterback. But now it's like with 9, these young quarterbacks, if you just want to get them reps, there's no issue whatsoever throwing them in as many games as you can, assuming you've got leads in certain games where you're able to do that.
I think that you pointing out the roster shrinking is very smart. I do think that's a piece of this. I do think going from 4 to 9 feels a little extreme.
Yeah.
I think maybe 6 or 7 would have been fine, but 9 seems
worth noting. It's also, this is coaches unanimously voting on this. That doesn't mean that's the approved rule. It's very possible that a more middle ground number ends up being selected. Of course, to my point, what I just said, coaches, of course, are going to want that rule in place because it does allow them to have, I'm struggling on the math because it's not my strong suit, but I'm trying to think here. Like, if you have freshmen that are able to play 9 games, you drop to the 105, how many more players it feels like you have on your depth chart to your disposal during those seasons? Like, of course, coaches are going to want that so that they can build depth, because I think that's one of the biggest fears among college coaches right now, is that no one ever feels like they have enough depth nowadays.
I'll do the easy math and say that they can play 75% of the games in the regular season.
Yeah, there we go. I like that.
Kipp, what do you make of this proposal, this recommendation the coaches are giving?
What are we even doing? Right. Like, just make it 5 years flat. Like, we don't count the postseason games. So there's just 3 games. We're just talking about we're fighting over 3 games here. Like, I don't see what the difference is here. Like, just make it a 5 years. Get rid of red shirts. Like, the word red shirt, we have to like add it. Like, he's a red shirt sophomore. He's a 5th year senior. Like, just it's 5 years. You get 5 years to play. Like that. That's just it. Because now you're having to do weird roster management. Like, you're having to like not play guys because you're like, oh, or like you're having guys pull themselves out because they're like, well, I'm only playing like third quarter a little bit, I want to go, hit the portal and get some more playing time. So sorry, coach, I'm out, after whatever. Like, if that happens in November now instead of like the beginning of October, what have we really done? Like, it's just, I think it's silly. It all depend on like, when is your non-conference schedule now? Like, when are you playing a non-SEC opponent to where those other guys like might see the field? Now you're looking at the schedule and you're like, well, okay, like Georgia's playing so-and-so in week 12. So like they might have to not play this guy until then. It's always a weird calculus. And I think that vote right there, like, I mean, we just went from the 20 to the 21 yard line, I feel like, and it's just a weird vote. But again, I guess maybe it's just analytics taking over. Like, they figured out, like, if we add, this X number of games, it'll help prevent injuries and whatever. It's like, we'll save $200,000 or something like that. I don't know, but for fans, they're just like, this means nothing to us. Just tell us how many years they can play football and let them go play football for that many years. So cool, I guess.
You had me thinking about something else. Like, I'm just trying to think of reasons why this would have got, like, 4 to 9 just feels wild to me. But maybe the transfer portal and the way things are going has played a role in that, where it's like guys do leave because they aren't getting enough run, and so they end up holding themselves out so that they're not playing more than 4 games, and then they end up transferring, whereas now coaches are going to feel that they're able to play guys for 9 games, and they might feel more inclined to have future opportunities at that school. I don't know. I'm just trying to brainstorm why this would have been unanimously voted on the way that it was. I'm with you on the 5-year rule, Kipp.
Makes too much sense.
I'm right there.
It is one of those things. It just makes too much sense for them to just do it.
Yeah, I'm right there with y'all. Unanimous on the Junkyard Dawgcast. So you guys remember that we were pushing for this. All right, dogs in the NFL, man. We are going on to the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. 7 of the 8 teams that are still alive have Bulldogs on their roster. Can't root for the Denver Broncos. Just y'all keep that in mind. But it was a big weekend for several Georgia Bulldogs. Matthew Stafford threw for over 300 yards. DeAndre Swift, James Cook running hard. Kamari Lassiter, I don't know if you guys saw this on social media. He had a really good game against the Steelers, and someone was like, "Yeah, he played really well and gave up a catch." And Kamari's going, "When did I give up a catch? When did that happen?" They did a great job shutting down the Steelers. Kipp, was there any Georgia player that you thought really stood out in that first round of the playoffs? And as you know, even some of the guys that got put out, the Eagles losing, that obviously knocked a chunk of Bulldogs out. But any Georgia players you thought stood out to start the NFL playoffs?
I was actually shocked at how well the Jaguars, for the most part, stymied James Cook. I think he's going to – I mean, like the Broncos game, like that game is fascinating to me because it just – like no one's talking about them and they're the number 1 seed. Like I just don't feel like anyone's been talking about the Broncos in the playoffs. So I just want to see people love talking about the Bills. And so I want to see that matchup. It stands out to me as being one, where I think James Cook can really, go from star to superstar status. Matthew Stafford just keeps chugging along, another 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, just getting it done. That guy's, after what I saw last night and what I saw most of the first round as far as quarterback play in the playoffs, like some of the just worst quarterback play for playoff teams I've ever seen. My team's not even in the playoffs. That's how bad the Falcons quarterback play is. I think he kind of stands out as just being a guy that I think he can go on a run. I think that the Rams are in really good shape. Puka Nacua is just going to have 300,000 targets as long as they play. So I think that's just kind of the easy one for me to kind of point out. But maybe that game surprises me, and it's actually our guy Swift comes through and has a big game. I think there's just a lot of opportunities for offensive players from Georgia, for the school known for its defense now, with the entire Georgia defense out, with the Eagles being out. I think this is where the offensive players might shine.
I want to shout out, too, with the number 1 seed in the NFC, Mike McDonald, former Georgia graduate assistant with the Seahawks. So excited to see what they're able to do. Ben, make sure and unmute. Anybody stand out to you, guys, that you've been interested in, former Dogs, in this playoff run?
I love watching Kamari Lassiter play, man. I think every single time I watch him play, I say, we just did not appreciate that dude enough. And we appreciated him a lot, and everyone appreciated him a lot. I'm not saying that he wasn't appreciated, but man, I still don't feel like we appreciated him enough. Also Matt Stafford, man. I know that I feel like maybe 7 years ago, the is Matt Stafford a Hall of Famer conversation kind of got going. And all he's done since then is win a Super Bowl, get number 1 seeds, be in the MVP conversation, make ridiculous throws, and then lead game-winning touchdown drives in key spots. So it's kind of remarkable. That's another guy. I think that the way that people will talk about Matthew Stafford after his career's over, and when you look back on it and you're like, man, when you really think about it, it's pretty crazy everything that he did and accomplished as a number 1 overall pick. He really is that guy. And I don't know about y'all, but those 2 guys are 2 guys that I'm rooting for in this postseason at this point.
I want to point out, too, with Matthew Stafford, before this season, there were a lot of people being like, is he going to play this year? If you guys remember, they were very coy about his injury situation. He was staying in an Airstream trailer while they were going through preseason practice. So unbelievable to see Matthew Stafford still doing this. And I will say I'm rooting for the Rams to make a run. I'd like to see Stafford, at his age. It's just unreal what he's been able to do.
They have our pick too, the Falcons pick too, right?
Oh, they sure do, yeah.
So go win the Super Bowl and then get the Falcons first round pick. Not a bad deal.
Hey man, they're usually not worried about those picks. They usually say something about those picks that I can't say on the show. But also, shout out Nick Chubb. Forgot about him. Getting to play in the playoffs, having to overcome a quarterback who fumbled 5 times and turned the ball over 3 times. You'd think that, if the opposing quarterback does that, you'd have to win. But sorry, Aaron Rodgers found a way to be even worse than that offensively. But just the fact that Nick Chubb gets to play in the playoffs after, carrying the Cleveland franchise for most of his career and having that tough injury, I think that is another guy that I think most Georgia fans will find pretty easy to root for.
Georgia men's basketball minute. Georgia goes on the road to South Carolina, wins 75-70 on Saturday, moves to 14-2 on the season. Kipp, I want to turn it over to you. You handled the coverage of this game. What stood out to you from that one? The Bulldogs getting another big win on the road.
I mean, Cannon Catchings, that's the easy thing to stand out. Like, if his shot comes, like, that just opens up what Georgia's able to do offensively. Like, again, the reason why some other guys had to step up is because, he was having some tough runs out there. And him heating up in conference play and getting some confidence as far as that 3 would just go really a long way towards Georgia being able to be a different team, a team that can overcome lulls where you're like, they haven't scored in 3-4 minutes, which they still had in that game. That's just how, that's how South Carolina is. Especially at home. And so for Georgia to go 1-1 on the road in the SEC play, that's why they didn't really drop in the rankings. Like, you almost take that any chance you can get it, regardless of who you're playing in this conference. But the return of Santos Surreal, like, you're sitting there wondering, like, that Florida game, like, it was pretty ugly. They got beat pretty handily for most of the game, but the lesson that he learned, like, by that mistake. And he seemed to own it. Mike White said he owned it. And he had a huge impact in that game against South Carolina. So I just think those two guys, Coach White after the game was pretty effusive, just talking about, like, Santo knows what he did. We all talked about it. And then there's the fact that he just went, on his own, talking about the journey of Cannon Catchings that he's had, having to watch other guys get most of the offense run through them, waiting his turn, and how important that is throughout the course of the season to know we're going to need you. I think that kind of says a lot of as far as how Mike Wright has constructed this roster and kind of the depth that he kind of has in this team.
Yeah, with Catchings, before every basketball season, I pick one player and I say, this is the guy that's going to determine how far Georgia goes. And Cannon was my pick because you saw flashes at BYU, but he fell out of the rotation late in the season. I think a lot of that was due to his defense, and he's been kind of quiet, especially to start SEC play, but that was a huge performance for him on the road, and maybe that sparks him, gets him going. Georgia now ranked number 21 in the country. They'll be back in action Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. They are hosting Ole Miss. Big opportunity against a struggling Ole Miss team. That game will be televised on ESPNU. Well, we've had a long episode, but Kipp, before we get out of here, I'm going to throw it back to you. Matt Ryan back with the Atlanta Falcons as the president of football. How are we feeling about Matt Ryan coming back, Matty Ice, and just where things stand as they continue their search for a new head coach and general manager?
No pressure, Matty Ice. Do not screw this up. You've got an outstanding opportunity. You're getting to call the shots. We're not worried about what Rich McKay is doing. Like, don't even let him in the door. Don't answer his calls or texts. Take control of this franchise and steer us in the right direction. You gave, Falcons fans basically the best memories of most of their lives. I enjoyed Chris Chandler's big season with Jamal Anderson, but like just the fact that Matt Ryan had a Hall of Fame career. You can't really say a lot of things about the Falcons as far as Hall of Famers, him and Julio Jones. Bringing in Tony Gonzalez, like that's basically the best time, the best era for the Falcons. So with him in charge, like, again, have a plan in place. Don't have us thinking like this last year we're signing quarterbacks, drafting quarterbacks at the same time. Like, I just think the vision that Matt Ryan will bring to this franchise will be a huge breath of fresh air. And it's exciting. I know we'll find new ways to screw up. but it just feels a little bit better knowing that at least now we can look straight at Matt Ryan and know good things, bad things. Like, he had a hand in it, and it's just you give him the benefit of a doubt more than you give anybody else making decisions in that franchise right now.
Matt Ryan saved the franchise back in 2008. He's going to try to do it again. Ben, you got any thoughts on Matt Ryan, or really just where the Falcons are right now?
I don't know, dude. I mean, surely, what's going to change? Surely they'll make the playoffs again eventually. I don't know when that'll happen. I mean, I'm done having real thoughts about the way that the Falcons are operated, the way they construct their roster. I'll just sit here and hope that one day, eventually, we are getting to watch a Falcons playoff game again.
Fingers crossed. And Kipp said, don't answer Rich McKay's texts or calls. That's my general advice to people when they ask me about Ben Wolk. So we'll end the episode right there. Thanks to Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks everyone who watched us live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Be sure and go subscribe to Dawgs247.com. If you love the podcast, the best way to help us out is go join us on the Junkyard. Like we made it abundantly clear with the amount of timestamps we gave on today's episode, you got to stay glued over there because we're going to have all the updates there. A lot of stuff still going on with this roster, and we're going to have the latest there. Still, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, Georgia basketball in the thick of things now, 14-2, still ranked in the top 25. You can follow our coverage there. Won't be long before Georgia baseball gets rolling. I think they might have interviews in the next week or so. Olivia Sayer is going to have that covered for us. A big spring ahead, and before you know it, we'll be talking about spring football. So we want you guys to be on board there. Subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Please rate and review. Helps us a ton. Subscribe to the YouTube Dawgs 24/7. We've got all the interviews. We've got clips from these shows. We've got Mike White press conferences, interviews with basketball players as well. And before long, we'll have Wes Johnson and the Georgia baseball players video there as well. And go subscribe to the Dawgs 24/7 TikTok as well. Need to really take advantage of that in the offseason, get some more content over there. So we'll end the episode right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.